Well, hello everyone. You here show you right here is like talk about for Tears of the Heart, and from 1998 to 2001, and I know that for anything about based on any source of information, it's like based on from what we may have heard about on the news, but you see right here is this activity right here talks about right here. I'll talk about for September 11th, and I'm sure most of us have seen you talk about this here for Tears of the Heart. But this right here will be like some sketches right here. This was right here was example right here of a class assignment, which I know that it was during English time. It's like that early in the morning or so. You have right here is like some examples right here of like you have right here is the Twin Towers right here, like the World Trade Center, and you have right here is another building. And I know I could have added more details of maybe a few buildings, which I know that, and I even still have some of those Time magazines from where that spot from where the World Trade Center once stood, and as well as like for knowing about on that day of September 11th. But I mainly want to go ahead and talk about is like right here is to where they have right here as example right here the Pentagon, as well as for like the other location was the field, I think, and parts of I think of Pennsylvania or somewhere like that, another hijacked plane. But anyway, but you see right here is I want to put together right here are these drawings right here with the pen that talk about say for the World Trade Center with the Twin Towers right here. This right here looks like this right here would be example right here of New York City. I would say from back in back in 1998 or some sort. Some back in '98 that the city of New York City, if it's going to be uptown New York or downtown New York, but or like parts of where say parts of Washington D.C. and it's like if it's New Jersey or somewhere like that. But you see right here is this right here is like a city right here. And if anybody were Warren Tour to do our studies about you're like Warren Tour, you would not really think that there will be what you call any type of a target, a matter of like any building that what you call known as like besides the Oklahoma City bombing. But you see right here is that that with the city though is that this city that we're like Warren to where you wouldn't think that one of those would be what you call as known as like a target to where that for the past 3 years, 3 or 4 years, that people would not expect to where that they are thinking about planning on maybe an attack, or if anything is about for if it's anything about maybe terrorist or anything like that. So that's just the thing though, is to where this right here looks like a normal city and a big city too, but then on your hand, you would not think that it would be any kind of war zone. So if anybody were warned or that anything about based on like any type of war zone, and for anything about these right here will be examples right here of some towers right here of you see the World Trade Center. You have right here of the towers, but you have right here would contain about I would say maybe at least three 300 or something like that, maybe about 180 or so businesses that would be offices that would be located in these towers, and maybe about 1,500 or 1,500. I would say about at least 15,000 if anybody were warned to where they that at least there was at least in each tower that there was altogether maybe about 32,850 or so offices. These 32,000 offices that were located inside of those inside the buildings, and with this like with the World Trade Center that I don't know all the details about, is to where that that if one one of those offices there was a bank, and as well as if there was an insurance company inside of one of those buildings or so. But with the buildings though that were like weren't to where that there would be like you have right here as an example right here of one of inside the building too. So if anybody were warned toward it while they were working at work that one morning, and then they don't expect to where that they could be what you call the targets that you whenever the plane. I think the plane that struck the North Tower until before it hit the South Tower or so. But if I can remember right, I think this right here, if this is the North Tower and that's the South Tower or something like that. But anyway, if I can remember right, this tower right here was hit first, and this one right here was hit second. But But if anybody were like Warren, to where if you're going to be what you call looking at the towers, facing east, or if it's facing west or so, and you're trying to know about the difference between the north side and the south side. So you see right here is that these right here will be sketches right here of the World Trade Center right here, and then this right here will be example right here of an airplane. And with this airplane, and I know that we may see it like your different, say different states of say of the country, that you may see your airplanes flying around, maybe flying around, different, areas to say of the state, besides the restricted areas, but still that you would see your planes almost all the time, but maybe about how many of them are going to be flowing below longitude, latitude. Is that for anybody that may warrant toward it, if anybody notices, like for test, it's like that if you see anything unusual that you would maybe think that well, I wonder if they're testing equipment, and you're like warrant to where that the amount of time that we have to react to something to where if we see something really unusual. So you're like warrant to where that back during the time of 1998 that maybe that they had equipment to where that they can actually test the radar system, as well as besides the internet security, as well as the airport security, that they would have allowed during that time. That there was a lot of things that were allowed during that time too, maybe a few things that they still had restrictions on. But you see right here is I talk about for warning signs, and let's just say that from back in 1998 that would have given that would have given the president, as well as for anybody else like it, if there would be like any kind of warning signs. But I don't really know the whole story about that. But let's just say that if there was like 5 years, it's like for 5 years as to where that if there could have been like what you call any warning signs, which I think that there were, but maybe not based on the World Trade Center, maybe other buildings, as well as anybody else, any other terrorist that more likely if it's if it's about maybe Iraq or Afghanistan or Al Qaeda or any of those other countries that could have like say posed like a threat to United States, but or any other type of a structure, any type of buildings like that. Any buildings that more likely that if there was any type of a warning signs, but based on like for terrorism, but I can remember this whenever I was in school though, is to where that that I can remember that it was a half day, and I know if anybody remembers me, posting that video from last year, I think it was for Tears of the Heart, and I was talking about as to where that for knowing about as to where that that was a half day, knowing about number away you remember about the ones that were that were lost during that time. It's like on that day. And another thing too is to where that you talk about is to where like a half day, because I can remember I was in school during that time. It was a half day that I can remember that our release. That most of the students and teachers. I think the teachers didn't get out of school until about 1 or 2 o'clock that afternoon sometime, but the students got home right around 10:30 that morning. If I can remember right, that they were announcing to where that it was going to be an early release day. And whenever I was in school, I can remember, on that day, I think, on September the 9th it was, that would have been, I think, on a Monday or like that Friday, I think, September the 8th, something like that, whenever I was in school. And I can remember that they would talk about, about an assignment or anything that was due, by this day or by next, by Monday next week, they tell you about what assignments that were due. And if I can remember right, that I even still have some of that paperwork too, by the way, that if anybody warrants us toward it, if I can go ahead and include those, but still that that may take a little bit more time too. But on the other hand, that some examples of some of my English writings, and if anybody were warrant toward necessarily about it's like for what I can include, it's like in this activity right. It's like knowing about Tears of the Heart for 1998, and but for 2001. But you see right here is I would include right here of like some examples right here of some of my schoolwork right here. And this right here is like you see right here is that to where he is the person you saw at the store. But on the other hand, that you see this right here, be some of the other work that I would you've been working on in English class. It is right here, and but if I can remember right, that this right here would have been written right around I think up right on it September the 11th, or maybe the day before that, something like that. But you see right here is that include right here is that some of my classwork from back then during that time. So I kept thinking about really about which what exactly any schoolwork that I was working on from before or after that day or so. But yeah, this question right here would have been as to where what do you think that you should think about what that happened in New York City and in Washington D.C. And it's like I am mad at those people that were killed. And but on your hand, that these right here will be some examples of some of my classwork. So as far as this was right here is like before it's like a cause like a cause and effect to where that that anything that you were working on from before as of September the 7th and until September the 14th, and then it's like the 17th, and it's like for the 20th. So like for anybody that while they were working on something, maybe on a job, and they don't expect to where that they that they hear some commotion going on outside about something sounds like, we say if it's going to be anything like a plane or a missile or anything like that, plane or missile or anything like that that's going on outside. So but I was also thinking about right here, if most of us can see this right here, is to where I have right here of this writing right here. I don't even know if I was writing this, right on, if it was on September the 11th, or if it was maybe on September the 8th, something like that, during English class. So right around, I would probably say right around at 9:15 a.m., something like that, whenever the first plane, the first struck, the tower. I think it was the North Tower, I think, South Tower. I think they said it was like the South Tower, something like that. But whenever the first plane that hit, that if I can remember right, that was right around English class. If I can remember right, if I can remember all this stuff in order, that whenever my English class first started, that I think that was right around, that was right around 8:15 in the morning, something like that. So the first plane would have came right around 9:15. So if I can remember right, I was in the FACS class during the time, in the cooking class. So I can remember I was in the class, but I was just getting out of my English class during that time too, and I was in another class, and then there was another class that I was also in that whenever the principal had announced to where that there was some planes that that struck. It's like one that came and hit the World Trade Center, and one of them that came and and hit the Pentagon, and so since they didn't have the TV go on during that time too, I was also thinking about what are you talking about? And like, what's the principal talking about? And then you hear about on the radio, and then they even had the TV going in even in the library. That they allowed a few of the students who were between freshman, sophomore, junior, and seniors that were in the library, and I would say that there was altogether about maybe 40 students, if I can remember right, that were in the library watching the news about what was going on from that the buildings that were hit, the World Trade Center that was hit, that was in smoke, that was on fire, and they would talk about it on the news. So I can remember that the basic about from what I can remember from what happened on that school day, and it was a half a day, so it seemed like that there was a lot of things that were going on during that time, and I was thinking to my mind as to where for a lot of people who were really thinking about it was like knowing about, well, I wonder what's going on, and then they're like anything else that was going on, and anything that that the teacher and the students that were paying attention to. So I was also thinking about as to where, if there was any news articles about anything about the postage about what was going on in New York City. So basically is to where if anybody were warned to where that anything that you may have around in your backpack or in your binder or so, that more likely that could be used for, for like, keeping people updated about what was going on up in New York City or so. But you see right here is and this was right here was an example right here of a class assignment, and I know that during those teachers would ask a lot of times is that why what do you think about what happened on that day on September 11th, about what was going on with those planes, as well as from whenever they struck the towers, and whenever they hit the Pentagon, as well as that they crashed into the field. And so I can remember that they were asking about me about that, about what do you think about this or that. And if I can remember right, yeah, I was only about maybe 17 during that time. So I was 17, and just thinking about it to where that whenever I first heard about the news, it was a half a day, and I can remember going home, and then they can remember that they were even announcing it, even on the news about what was going on, from whenever the towers that were hit and whenever they collapsed. So that just think about it to where that a lot of the warning signs, especially that were going on too, during from 1998 to early as in 99, from 2000, and so it's like I remember my teacher told me one time, besides like the Columbine shooting, is to where anything that's going to be anything about terrorists or anything like traumatic ordeals that were going on in the schools, or maybe if it's going to be shopping malls or wherever it is about terrorists, so is to making sure that everybody's safe as well. So that's just a thing, though, is to where that if we see something wrong, and then the chance are is to speak up. But I also wonder as to where that really that if there was like for any kind of warning signs necessarily, any kind of warning signs as to where that if I see something wrong, it seems like to where that if that's just me, or if I should speak up about it, or I should do something about it. So that is why that sometimes that for anything that I do is to where that I might get concerned about it, and I may get overly worried, and if I say that, yeah, we may have all heard that before, to where that we learn by our mistakes, we learn by our mistakes, but really that something like this, as well as anything else that's related to like terrorism, as well as anything about your safe regard as well, that really do we kind of call that which call a mistake, or we kind of call that as toward it knowing about situations that come up, to where it knowing about the basic signs about how to react to them, and especially to where if anybody were warned, to where whenever you get a shot, whenever you get your tetanus shot, and then they may not realize that maybe you could be allergic, you could have an allergic reaction to that shot, and you're like worried to where, well, if somebody were to give you a shot, and then they don't really check to see about as to where that if your body can, because that's why that they usually ask, is you're making sure that anything that's the vaccines and stuff that are contained in that shot. And if anybody warns us to where any type of medications, any type of medication prescriptions or anything like that, if you could be allergic to anything that those medicines, those antibiotics could contain, that it's like knowing about the doctors and nurses, you'd be aware of that. So back in as early as 1998, that we may not have all that stuff really to be aware of anything that was going on, anything concerned. But really, I'm like, isn't that really about what for anybody probably say about whose job is it to keep track of what's safe, and what's a concern, so if anybody were worried to where that has any teachers in the school have ever asked you that question, to where whose job is it to make sure that things go fine, about infrastructure, making sure that nothing fails, whose job is it? And so this right here, these right here will be like some of my schoolwork right here. I didn't work on, say, in English class, but let's just say right here is to where this right here would be example right here. If I can go ahead and try to zoom in right here, and have right here is like, yeah, that this right here reads is to where like first aid, and as well as for danger, and as well as for police and warning, and as well as for poison. And I don't have a date written on this, just to really to talk about oh yeah, it was written on this what you call, if anybody warns, to where at the same time that you're trying to get some practice spelling lessons as well as anything that you're going to be writing about. If it's going to be what you call, oh, you didn't spell it right, you got to write it 3 times, write it 5 times. So that's just the thing, though, is that we may have gotten our practice a number of times, but how many times have we practiced as to where that there's any warning signs that come around, like September 11th, or if there's going to be what you call a tsunami that comes by and wipes the town out, knowing about really about anything that goes on necessarily about if it's going to be terrorism. And I know that I heard about even on the news about as to where that staff there, even at the airports, had noticed some warning signs, but then they may say as to where it was too late really to stop the matter. So you're like, Warren Tour, what kind of English class do you think that they took of knowing about if they see something wrong, then maybe that they need to react to that? And I know that nowadays that you're like Warren Tour, especially for like if it's going to be online for scams or anything like that, or if it's anything about fraud or anything like that. But still, that if we're talking about that possibly that we could maybe be saving hundreds of lives, as well as that we could also be preventing anything that could anything serious that could happen also. And I would say that my story basically goes by a story that at the same time that maybe that these terrorists, by the time it takes them to get to the airport, by the time it takes for them to hijack a plane, by the time it takes for them to fly into a building, is about maybe about how long it took for me to really what you call is like to where get some practice about how to spell this, and maybe about for a show up for class and anything that I was working on. And anybody say that your job could have been what you call it, maybe a little bit of the opposite compared to somebody else's job, is to where that besides learning how to spell police or knowing about danger or first aid, and at the same time that some people that may not be aware of what's going on the other side, say on the other side of the room, other side of the wall. So the way we think about this, it seems like to where like a cause and effect, and I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like a cause and effect to where that something that's what you call is not really a responsibility yet. It's not a job yet until something happens, and then that's whenever they kind of put you on a situation to where that does that mean that you just get promoted or whichever, like something that happened that there was a fire that happened, or there was an explosion, or if there was anything about maybe terrorism. So that's the thing about it, is to where that I don't have a date on this right here to where for whenever this assignment was written, but on the other hand, that you see right here is that this right here would be some examples right here of some of my classwork right here, and then right here is like the World Trade Center right here. So if anybody will warrant where that you still have some of that work from ever since from September 11th, and that was from school though, and I can tell anybody here really it's hard for me really to explain the story, especially if I wasn't there. So if anybody were warned, or that a lot of the information, of course, that I've had kept from over the years was either in the Time magazines, or if it was in anything about any other type of news articles, as well as that what you read, what you heard about, especially on the documentaries. But if this was right here was me speaking, if anybody were warned toward it, back whenever you were only 17, that you may have said a few words, but then now it's like that whenever if you're actually drawing like a little demonstration of what you're talking about, and others that may think about as to where, oh yeah, an airplane right there. But this airplane right here that may not show any type of signs of maybe terrorism, that this right here could be what you call maybe something that you would see on one of those Superman shows or something like that. A tornado or that he turns the tornado upside down, like anything that you may see on one of those superhero comics or anything like that. But this right here that we would probably think about a city, you would not think this would be what you call an example right here of a war zone. And I guess on that day that it was kind of like what you call, an example of like what you call like a war zone. And so that's just a thing though, is that that for like if it's going to be terrorists or warning signs, is that really about whose job is it? Really just making sure everybody's safe as well. And let's just say if everybody had about 5 years to prepare, to where that making sure that everybody's safe, if there's anything that goes wrong or anything that you may think that would you call, oh well, it's just a test, it's just a test. And I know that like with anybody that you really, what's the difference between what you call is just a test? It's just a test. And really, that if there's going to be what you call any airplanes, why else do you think that maybe that they could be flowing up, below, latitude or longitude? It's like knowing about why else do you think that they would be flying very low? Is it maybe because they're lost? And at the time, you're like Warren, to where that really, that with the pilots though, and I could tell anybody here that whenever I first heard the news, I was kind of upset and worried about what was going on too, because that this right here, from how the planes flew into the buildings, looked like a lot like a stunt. It was like a stunt. It was to, like, if you want to call it, like, look like something that you would see on one of those movies or some sort. It was like a stunt. And the test maybe about how real the steel was, whichever it is. But on the other hand, that it was like, yeah, that whenever I first, I can remember that the news, watching the news most of that morning and afternoon too, and most of that night too, is to where watching what was going on in the news about whenever the planes that flew into the buildings, and for the people that were killed also. And then think about as to where that they got the president upset too about that. And so that's just the thing that whenever I draw these, I'm like, I may not have all the information about knowing about, really, I was not even there, so how can I really tell this story? But if anybody wants to know about a little bit about what had to say about that too. But I can remember whenever I first heard about the news, I kept thinking about it, as to where not really make a tease about it, but I thought the pilots were drunk. I'm like, why, what happened? I'm like, the plane went into the building. What's wrong with those pilots? Well, how come, did they lose control of the plane or something? And then after about maybe, a couple of hours later, and then that's whenever my parents was like, we were talking, and that's whenever that, I went to work that day too. I can remember that I was working in fast food during that time, and I can remember that I went into work that afternoon, so I didn't have a whole lot of time really to talk to everybody about, hey, did you hear the news? But I can remember that I went into work on that same day. It would have been, if I can remember, it would have been on that Tuesday. So if anybody that may weren't, to where that on September 11th is to where if they had to work that day, or like you're like weren't, to where that anything that you hear about on the news, that you just kind of have to carry on, that you had to go to a meeting at 2:30 or so. You had to go to the meeting at 2:30. You can't continue watching the news coverage or anything like that that's going on. But still, that those people up there in New York would probably think about, as to where a number of things that either were postponed or canceled, due to for what happened also. And I know that I can remember a speech teacher told me one time that was around the time, that a few, one or two films that were postponed or canceled due to the fact that because of after September 11th too, like whenever Spider-Man came out. And as well as, I think, I don't know if Harry Potter, if I can remember right, Harry Potter was just being released, the very first film, right around that time. I can remember I still had those Time magazines too, but whenever the first Harry Potter movie, The Sorcerer's Stone, I think it was, whenever that was first released, but after September 11th, it was like that, that some of those films that were, you say that there was a few scenes, one or two scenes that were taken out of the film, but anyway, but talk about For Tears of the Heart, from back in 1998 to 2001, is talk about for terrorism, is that we warned to where that for, if anybody warns, to where a number of questions that they probably say is to where after the attacks happened, there was a number of questions that were warned to where that who would want to use a plane as a weapon, as a missile, and aim it at a big building, and that you're like warned to where, well, really that there may be and then if anybody warns us to where, really, I'm like, who would use a bus as a submarine? But really that who would want to use a bus as a submarine? And I know that, for anybody, I say you get those ideas based on maybe the cartoons, maybe the Magic School Bus, but where we're talking about, people are saying that, well, we're just testing the equipment. But I'm like, well, no, I'm like, that's no accident. Yeah, it's something to need to be aware of also. But anyway, the types of jobs that maybe all of us can do is to where if any warning signs especially, and I know that anybody that may weren't to where that they even had radar during that time, so it's not like to where that nobody's seen the iceberg coming for what sank the Titanic or anything like that. Well, what we're talking about is to where that the technology that they did have during that time, that maybe that they didn't use it properly, and you're like weren't to worry about that. The type of technology, the type of training skilled that most of the employees that did have during that time that we weren't, or that maybe that they didn't use them properly or they didn't have the proper training or anything like that. But maybe that may not be the case either. But on their hand too, to where for who was charged of knowing about, for the people who got on the plane and knowing about for how it was planned and how it happened also. So that really that for anybody that you're like Warren to where that if you see a plane flying around the sky or so, and you wouldn't think that one of them would decide to fly the plane into the building, or what you call is like maybe land the plane on top of the building, and plane that got struck by lightning, so it had to make an emergency landing, and you're like Warren to where, hey, not on the building, but in the river. You'll land the plane in the river, and if it's going to be emergency landing or so, and but still, that if anybody warns us toward it, that for like terrorists though, and I know that 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 a teacher asked me too is to her that why do you think that the terrorists decide to destroy the Twin Towers other than trying to destroy the Statue of Liberty? And my answer was basically is toward it. Well, maybe because of those terrorists that they thought is toward it that something about that the tallest maybe skyscraper, or if I can remember right, that it was something about what I told her is that well, more likely it's because that that they didn't really think too much about is about the Statue of Liberty. I'm like the Statue of Liberty though it's like compared to the buildings, but the answer I basically gave her was is to her that I guess there what you call certain structures around the country, so certain building structures around the country that people probably say that they pick a target necessarily. One of those could be maybe the tallest skyscrapers. What's the other one that could be possibility? I'm like, one of those more like it could be is to where, oh yeah, somebody was mad at the IRS, or somebody was jealous about maybe that big sign or so that said that's written in gold or whichever it is. But the way I think about it though is I can remember that talking about this and actually talking to my teachers, and I can remember that the way that they were looking at me was making me want to laugh. Also, it's like that whenever they look at me, it was like don't be looking at me like like I'm crazy. I'm like that. Sometimes that whenever I'm trying to talk about something and I tend to want to kind of giggle a little bit because about just the way that they look at me, and the way that they look at me, and they're like that sometimes that whenever people look at me, and that usually means this toward that they are listening to you, and you're getting their attention also, and sometimes it's like well, you're looking at me like you don't know what I'm talking about, or that you just the way that you look at me is like I don't know what you think about whenever you're looking at me, but I'm trying to exaggerate about what I think about something. So that's just a whole part of it, like knowing about anybody like Warren to where that back then it's like if you would be standing maybe talking talking to the class about something that you learned in school or whichever, and you drew the buildings, and then you drew about whatever that happened, and like with anybody that they'll probably maybe want to talk to you. Maybe if you were one of those emergency service callers, one of those callers that would had to make an emergency call, to the dispatchers about what was going on or so, and think about it to where if you were actually there, then maybe that there would be a lot more that people would want to ask you questions about, want to talk to you about necessarily. But on your hand, that me doing the presentation here with these sketches right here. Have right here is the airplane, and the airplane that more likely could have been is toward the that people maybe be testing the equipment or some sort, like around the Pentagon. But you're like Warren toward it. That these right here could be, just look like what you call just sketches right here. But these right here was known as buildings right here. Buildings that contain, that had a population, about up to at least 4,000 or 5,000 or so people coming in and out of it within a certain time of the hour. So you're like Warren toward, really, does anybody expect to go to work, to walk, to go to work, and then find out the fact is that that their building is under attack, and you're like Warren toward that yeah, people had so much time to evacuate the building, and so that's just the thing, though, is that and then I know that like I heard that a number of times is toward the plan was, I know, and I don't know too much about the whole Columbine story, but that people who are in the building, but then you're like Warren toward the people who would you call it, known as like for like if it's going to be what you call the that the material born killers, I think it was at the material. It's like if anything about this, like the born, it's like anything about the killers. So, but the natural born killers, I guess it was, how you pronounce it. But on your hand, that like basically about the plan goes is toward that yeah, you want to look at this as like a video game, is toward that you're going to look at a bomb, like an explosive device, as a toy, and so you're like Warren toward that you think that that's kind of cool and kind of neat looking toward. You're going to go ahead and place a bomb somewhere and thinking about, well, whoever that doesn't get out of the mess doesn't, So you think about it to where they're going to look at this as like maybe like what you call one of those science fiction type novels about to where that a bomb that goes off and the atomic bomb that goes off and kills a number of people, and you're like Warren toward just want to test about for how it worked, and as well as for what it did, especially, and think about it to where you're having the good times, whichever. But still, that there may be a number of ways of how we describe terrorism, but one of those ways would be is to where that, yeah, trying to think about is to where that, you don't need to be doing it here in this country or really anywhere else. If you're trying to have fun, and there's other ways of how to do it, or if anybody that may want to, or really, if that's what it's all about, or if it's all about is to where that that they don't what you call it, like they don't believe in the same say no, it's like for if it's going to be what you call is like if you're thinking about religion or anything like that, or if it's anything about it's like the American people as well. But anyway, but talk about here for the World Trade Center right here. And it's like based on my education as well. If anybody that warrants to, or that anybody listening and you're like warrant to, or that really that from back in 1998 that there could have been what you call a few warning signs, especially, but then knowing about that if they were delivered right to the right person, and some of them that could have been ignored, and some of them that what you call could have been what you call misleading or anything like that. But really that anything that's related to like any type of warning signs, especially, and think about us toward yeah that almost every year for the past maybe 20 years in the near future to where the people may warn toward it, yeah, that the day that those lives that were lost right on September 11th, and like warn to where that really that was what you call marked the half day over there at school whenever I was in school during that time. And it was like, at the time, you don't expect to where the half a day that meant to where that those 3,000 Americans that that were killed, and as well as to where that anything else is like knowing about how well that the pilots are trained too. So I can remember that whenever I seen this on the news, it looked like to like I know I may mention before to where these planes right here, because it looked like to me like yeah that it's that to me it's if anybody were warned, or it looked like something that you would see on one of those movies or on those TV shows or whichever, maybe on one of those Batman cartoons or whichever, but still that we're not talking about Batman and the Joker here. We're talking about, I know, with aircrafts and helicopters and So you're like Warren toward it, that the things that were going on at September 11th, and at the time you're like Warren toward that if unemployment was on the rise during that time too, maybe the Great Depression or anything like that about slavery, but on the other hand, that whenever I went into work that night, I can remember that it took me a couple of hours just to realize about what was going on during that time. And one of those things was as to where that it was the terrorists, that it was not the pilots. The pilots did not lose control of the plane. It was the terrorists that that hijacked those aircrafts and then and flew them right into the buildings. And so that's just a thing that is to where that. Whenever the first plane hit, in which I know that you say that it's all about piloted air, but still that I can remember that watching it on TV and then thinking necessarily toward it I don't think that anybody was testing the equipment at all. I just think that it's all about the attacks. It was all about war and as well as with the attacks. But anyway. But so far as my saying about this is that I want to also tell people here is that this is some of my schoolwork right here. So this, if I can remember right, this right here was written before September 11th. So if anybody say they wake up that morning and they expect, it's like they don't expect to turn on the TV. They could maybe turn on the TV just to check the weather, and they don't expect to see that the World Trade Center is on fire. But you're like Warren toward the things that the number of things that you're getting ready to do, and then something that you see that you don't expect to see on the TV or even on the radio, and at the time you're like Warren toward you do not expect an earthquake to come, and you do not expect maybe a tornado to come or anything like that, or a tsunami, hurricane to strike or anything like that. But just making sure that everybody's safe as well. It's like Notify for Tears of the Heart. Back in 1998 to 2001. Thanks for watching. Manny 25, and like as well as Matthew 31. Also, I like Matthew 31 as well as Manny 25. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.